Imagine waking up one morning and finding out that the single biggest tech investment in human history, over $1 trillion being poured into massive AI data centers right now, could all become completely worthless. Not in 50 years, not 20, but possibly within this decade. That is not a nightmare scenario from a sci-fi movie. That is the very real conversation happening right now inside the most powerful tech companies on the planet. And the thing responsible for all of this disruption is not another AI model. It is not a new chip. It is not even a new software breakthrough. It is quantum computing, a technology so fundamentally different from everything we have ever built that scientists are struggling to even find the right words to describe it. And right now, in 2026, quantum computing is beginning to do something nobody fully expected this soon. It is starting to kill the AI data center industry as we know it. To understand why this is such a massive deal, you first need to understand just how insane the AI data center boom has become. We are not talking about a few server rooms getting upgraded. We are talking about one of the most expensive infrastructure build-out in the history of civilization. In 2025 alone, the world spent an estimated $580 billion on AI-focused data center infrastructure. That number is almost impossible to wrap your head around. Microsoft committed over $80 billion in capital expenditures just for fiscal year 2026. Meta is projected to spend between $80 billion and $100 billion in 2026, up from $70 billion the year before. Google, Amazon, and every major hyperscaler on our Earth is racing to build the biggest, most powerful AI computing facilities money can buy. And if you think that money is just staying inside the tech industry, think again. U.S. utilities alone are planning $1.4 trillion in spending to supply power to these data centers. Electricity prices for regular American families have already risen nearly 40% since 2021, largely because of this demand. And some estimates say consumers could end up paying $700 billion of that $1.4 trillion total through rate hikes. If you're sitting at home wondering why your electricity bill keeps climbing, now you know why. If that does not shock you, hit that like and subscribe button right now, because what comes next will.
See this scratch? Auto shops will easily charge you $2 grand.
Now watch this. You can fix it easily at home yourself.
The AI data center energy problem is not just an economic issue. It is becoming a full-blown crisis. The International Energy Agency now projects that global data center electricity consumption will exceed 1,000 terawatt hours by the end of 2026. To put that in perspective, that is the equivalent of Japan's entire annual electricity usage, consumed just by data centers. The World Economic Forum has projected that data center energy use will double between 2024 and 2027 alone. Some estimates suggest AI-driven data centers now consume more electricity than entire nations. In Ireland, data centers already account for 21% of the country's total electricity consumption. By 2026, that number is forecast to hit 32%. In the United States, Bloom Energy estimates that total data center energy demand will nearly double from 80 gigawatts in 2025 to 150 gigawatts by 2028. And here's the part that nobody is talking about loudly enough. This explosive demand is crashing into a power grid that simply cannot keep up. Projects that secured land and financing years ago are sitting completely stalled, waiting for grid interconnection queues that stretch 3 to 7 years in major utility territories. Data center cancellations due to local community pushback actually quadrupled in 2025, with at least 25 major projects canceled outright. Maine became the first U.S. state to pass a full moratorium on large data center construction. The AI industry built itself a monster, and now that monster is eating the power grid alive. So what does any of this have to do with quantum computing? Everything. Because here's the fundamental problem with how AI works today. Every single AI model you use, every ChatGPT conversation, every image generated, every video rendered by artificial intelligence, requires classical computing power. Classical computers, even the most advanced ones, work by processing bits. Every bit is either a 0 or a 1. Simple, reliable, but brutally energy hungry at the scale that modern AI demands. Training a single large AI model can consume as much electricity as 5 average American homes use in their entire lifetime. Running that model after training, what engineers call inference, happens billions of times per day across the internet, consuming staggering amounts of power continuously, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every single day of the year. The entire AI data center empire exists because classical computing is the only tool we have had to do this job. But quantum computing does not play by the same rules, and that changes everything. Quantum computers do not use bits, they use qubits. And qubits can exist in a state of 0, 1, or both simultaneously, a phenomenon called superposition. On top of that, Qubits can be entangled with each other, meaning the state of one qubit can instantly influence another, no matter the distance. These two properties together allow quantum computers to process an almost incomprehensible number of possibilities at the same time, rather than sequencing through them one by one the way classical computers do. The practical implication of this is mind-bending. A UBS analyst report published in early 2026 described how the industry is approaching a quantum computer that could solve a problem in just 200 seconds, a problem that would take a conventional supercomputer 10,000 years. Read that again, 200 seconds versus 10,000 years. That is not a small improvement. That is not an upgrade. That is a completely different category of machine. And yes, if that blew your mind, go ahead and like and subscribe. Avitus, because the implications of that single data point are about to reshape every AI investment on the planet. Now here is where the quantum and AI data center story collide in a way that should terrify anyone who has bet billions of dollars on traditional computing infrastructure. In 2026, the three biggest names in quantum computing, Google, IBM, and Microsoft, have each crossed into territory that was considered theoretical just 2 years ago. Google announced its quantum echoes algorithm breakthrough, demonstrating the first verifiable quantum advantage with its Willow chip running a specific algorithm 13,000 times faster than classical supercomputers. IBM has unveiled quantum processors pushing past 1,000 qubits. Microsoft has made serious progress with its topological qubit architecture, which promises natural error resistance without the complex correction systems that have slowed quantum progress for years. And Microsoft's Majorana 1 chip, built on a breakthrough class of materials called a topoconductor, represents what experts are calling a transformative leap toward practical quantum computing. These are not press releases, these are engineering milestones. The race is no longer theoretical. It is happening right now in real labs, with real hardware, producing real results. The specific threat quantum computing poses to AI data centers comes down to efficiency in a way that cannot be overstated. Right now, the majority of what AI data centers actually do is optimization, finding the best solution among billions of possible options. Training a neural network is an optimization problem, running recommendations, fraud detection, drug discovery simulations, logistics calculations, all optimization. And optimization is exactly the category of problem where quantum computing achieves its most dramatic advantages. Quantum annealing systems and hybrid quantum classical architectures are already beginning to handle optimization tasks that would take classical supercomputers days or weeks, and solving them in minutes or hours. When quantum computers can routinely handle these workloads at scale, the need for hundreds of thousands of classical GPU servers, the machines that fill today's AI data centers, drops dramatically. Not to zero, but dramatically. The energy equation flips. The infrastructure equation flips. And the trillion-dollar investment sitting in those massive classical computing facilities starts to look very, very different. It is also critical to understand that this does not require quantum computers to fully replace classical computing overnight. The disruption happens long before that, the moment a credible timeline for practical quantum advantage becomes clear, and many experts now believe that timeline is between 2028 and 2030 for fault-tolerant, commercially viable quantum systems. The economics of continuing to build classical AI data centers begin to break. Why would a company spend $5 billion building a new classical GPU data center in 2026 if credible quantum hardware will be commercially available by 2029 or 2030? The investment calculus shifts, capital flows shift, and the companies that have already sunk billions into classical infrastructure face an increasingly difficult question about the long-term value of those assets. Google's Sundar Pichai has publicly stated that the company is optimistic that practical quantum workloads will emerge within 5 years. That is not a vague, futuristic statement. That is a CEO telling the market to start preparing. The energy dimension of this story cannot be left behind, because it is perhaps the single most powerful driver of quantum computing's rise. Classical AI data centers do not just use electricity, they devour it. And the quantum alternative is radically more efficient per unit of useful computation. Quantum processors themselves consume relatively little energy during actual computation. The energy-intensive part of quantum systems is the cryogenic cooling required to keep qubits at temperatures close to absolute zero, colder than outer space. But here's the critical difference. One quantum processor performing millions of calculations simultaneously uses a fraction of the energy that hundreds of thousands of classical processors would need to attempt the same calculation sequentially. As a 2025 analysis from Medium's Codex publication put it, the most realistic promise of quantum computing is not to eliminate data centers entirely, but to dramatically reduce the energy and physical footprint per unit of AI work performed. That is a revolution in efficiency, not just a new piece of hardware. And in a world where AI energy demand is projected to equal Japan's entire national electricity consumption this year alone, that efficiency revolution is not a nice to have. It is an existential necessity. If that scale of impact is not worth your subscription, nothing is. So go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. The geopolitical dimension of this story is equally staggering and equally underreported. McKinsey's 2025 Quantum Outlook tracked over $36 billion in public and private investment flowing into quantum technology. S&P Global reports that global investment in quantum technology has already surpassed $55 billion in 2025 alone. Governments across the United States, China, Europe, South Korea, and Japan are treating quantum computing as a matter of national security, not just industrial competitiveness. The race to achieve quantum supremacy is not just about who gets to sell the better computer, it is about who controls the next generation of encryption, military logistics optimization, pharmaceutical discovery, financial modeling, and artificial intelligence infrastructure. The country or company that achieves fault-tolerant quantum computing first will have an advantage over classical computing rivals that is comparable to the advantage a modern fighter jet has over World War I biplane. And the nations that have built their entire digital economies on classical AI data center infrastructure will face a painful and expensive transition if they miss the quantum window. There's also a darker side to the quantum story that deserves serious attention, one that has nothing to do with efficiency and everything to do with security. Quantum computers, as they become more powerful, pose an existential threat to the encryption standards that protect every piece of data inside every AI data center on Earth. Current encryption methods, the digital locks that protect bank transactions, government secrets, corporate data, and personal information are based on mathematical problems that are practically impossible for classical computers to solve in reasonable time. Quantum computers will be able to crack many of these encryption systems with relative ease. This is not a distant hypothetical. The cybersecurity community has a name for it, Q-Day, the moment when a quantum computer becomes powerful enough to break standard encryption. Databanks, government agencies, and major enterprises are now being told that quantum-safe protocols will be essential in enterprise data centers by 2030. ISO and other international standards, bodies are already developing the Quantum Computing Security Framework, ISO IEC 23837, to address this challenge. The data centers that are being built today will need to be rebuilt, or at minimum fundamentally retrofitted, to survive in a post-quantum security environment. That is another layer of cost, another layer of disruption. Another reason why the AI data center model, as it exists today, is running on borrowed time. What makes this story especially fascinating is the disagreement at the very top of the technology industry about how fast all of this is actually moving. At CES 2025, NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang famously said that practical quantum computers are still 15 to 30 years away from being truly useful, and that classical computing, especially GPU accelerated AI systems, would remain dominant for the foreseeable future. His comments immediately sent quantum computing stocks crashing.
Okay, so why isn't everyone adding a battery to their solar?
The government's paying up to $4,500 and no upfront cost if you qualify. And qualifying home.
But less than a year later, the same companies that Huang was dismissing had delivered breakthrough after breakthrough that directly contradicted his timeline. Microsoft's Majorana chip, Google's Quantum Echoes algorithm, IBM's 1,000 qubit processor, Quantinuum's H2 processor achieving quantum volume 33.5 million. These are not incremental updates. These are category-defining moments. And by 2026, even the most skeptical voices in the industry have been forced to acknowledge that the quantum timeline is compressing far faster than the conventional wisdom suggested. The 2025 quantum computing market revenue was already projected at $2.5 billion, with fault-tolerant quantum systems expected from multiple vendors between 2028 and 2030. Here is what this all means for the future in practical terms. The AI data center industry is not going to collapse overnight. Classical computers are not disappearing next Tuesday. But the architecture of the future, what computing actually looks like in 2030 and beyond, is not going to be 10,000 GPU data centers consuming more electricity than Japan. It is going to be a hybrid world. Quantum processors will handle the most complex optimization and simulation tasks. Classical systems will handle data storage, simpler inference workloads, and the vast majority of everyday operations. But the center of gravity is shifting. The companies and governments that understand this shift and begin positioning for it now will be the ones that win the next decade. The companies that assume the current AI data center model is permanent and keep pouring capital into it without accounting for the quantum disruption ahead are making a bet that history may judge very harshly. The data center industry itself is beginning to adapt, slowly but unmistakably. Major colocation providers and hyperscalers are now adding what industry reports call dedicated quantum zones inside their facilities, specialized areas designed to host quantum coprocessors alongside classical hardware. ODATA's 2025 report projects that by 2032, 5% of Tier 4 data centers globally will host quantum coprocessors for research and enterprise simulation. IBM is already running a quantum computer next to a classical supercomputer. Microsoft has been pushing a quantum processor specifically designed to fit inside standard server rack footprints. And NVIDIA, the same company whose CEO doubted quantum's timeline, launched a family of open source AI models called Ising, built specifically to manage the error correction challenges that have historically plagued quantum hardware. Even the greatest skeptic in the room is quietly hedging his bets. That should tell you everything you need to know about which direction the wind is blowing. And if you are following this story for the first time today, there is one more angle that deserves attention before we close this out, and it is one that affects regular people far more directly than most tech coverage ever acknowledges. The AI data center industry, in its current form, is being subsidized by ordinary consumers through rising electricity prices, tax incentives, and utility rate hikes, and those consumers are getting very little in return. The $1.4 trillion that U.S. utilities are planning to spend on power grid infrastructure for AI data centers is not being paid for by Google and Meta and Microsoft alone. Estimates suggest that residential consumers could end up absorbing nearly half of that total, approximately $700 billion, through rate increases passed on by utility companies. Meanwhile, the electricity bills for regular families have already climbed 40% since 2021. Goldman Sachs has warned that data center-driven electricity demand will push core inflation higher in 2026, 2027, and 2028. A professor of energy policy at the University of Pennsylvania described it plainly when she said that when a single data center campus consumes more power than 100,000 homes, the traditional cost-sharing model breaks down entirely. Ordinary people are paying to power a technological revolution that is reshaping the economy, and most of them have no idea it is happening. When quantum computing arrives and begins to deliver the same or greater AI capability at a fraction of the energy cost, that will not just be a win for tech companies. It will be a genuine relief for power grids, for electricity prices, and for every household that has been quietly subsidizing the AI boom without ever receiving a stock option or a thank you note. That is a human story behind the technology story, and it matters. The bottom line is this. The AI data center boom is real, it is massive, and it is reshaping the global economy, electricity grids, and geopolitical competition in ways that most people have barely begun to understand. But quantum computing is not a distant threat to this industry. The trillion-dollar question, and it is literally a trillion-dollar question given the capital already committed, is not whether quantum computing will disrupt AI data centers. It is how fast. Every credible projection puts commercial quantum advantage within the next 3 to 5 years. Every major tech company is investing aggressively in quantum. Every government on Earth with serious technology ambitions has a national quantum strategy. And every data center being built today on classical computing assumptions is either going to evolve or it is going to be left behind. What we are watching right now, in real time in 2026, is the opening act of the most consequential technology transition since the invention of the internet itself. The companies that see this clearly will adapt and thrive. The ones that dismiss it as hype will find themselves holding the world's most expensive, obsolete hardware. Quantum did not kill AI data centers with a single shot. It started something slower, deeper, and ultimately far more total. A disruption so fundamental that the industry may not fully grasp what hit it until the transformation is already complete. And when that moment arrives, the people who saw it coming, the ones who understood what was actually happening while everyone else was still arguing about electricity bills and gigawatts and quarterly earnings, will be the ones holding the future in their hands. Make sure you are one of those people. And if this video helped you see even a piece of the future more clearly, then do one simple thing right now. Hit the like button and subscribe, because the story we just told you is only going to get bigger from here.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That was Hardware Grid. Don't know his name. The Dice Man signing off.